I think what's interesting about this, like expanding to global talent markets, obviously, because it will bring you more access to that talent and to skills. But in order to do that effectively, you also need to be really mindful of like inclusive language and diversity hiring. And so I think, a lot of where I would like coach people in terms of where to start is thinking about, what aspects of your recruitment and selection process are like already, great at, practicing inclusion, addressing the diversity in thinking, et cetera. And what do we need to kind of tweak? And so really it starts with the job description, right? You need to think about, where are you putting those job descriptions? The job description that you're going to post in the US is going to be very different from one you post in India, just in terms of the language. Like we use different languages, we use different formatting, et cetera. I think, it's really obviously great if you have someone internally who can help you adapt those to like local culture and expectations, but also with all the technology out there, like GPT can be great at helping you improve your job descriptions, right? And tailoring them. And so like, to the extent that you have access to that, like definitely encourage people to use that as well. What you really want to do is obviously not have people look at it and then self-select out if they would have been a good option. And so that's really what your goal is with that, like job descriptions. The one thing I'll say too on that piece, which relates back to the skills-based hiring, is that, job descriptions today are often a laundry list of, 20, 30 different things like responsibilities, what we want from you, what you're going to get from us, all of these different things, right? In reality, you want a really narrow list of like 5 to 8 skills and maybe a few, values that really the person needs to do the job well and to execute the job well. So we think a lot about like stripping out what just like sounds great and like sounds professional and what you actually really need to do the job successfully. So that's one piece. I think another piece, which is really important, is like managing language barriers. So, like acknowledging what those are. If the job that you're hiring for does require the candidate to speak English, then obviously you do need to assess that at some point. There's a lot of like obviously language proficiency tests you can do, but that is an important component as well. And like to what extent do you need them to be proficient? So be mindful of that. Think about that really carefully around, what does the job require? The other thing to be mindful of, and this I see, um, you know, I guess it's like especially heightened in what I do because the company I work at, Hire Guide, we are also a like interview recording and transcription platform. And so what that means is that a lot of companies that work with us are now recording their interviews and getting transcription of their interviews. But the transcription has, we try, we use the most accurate transcription tool we can find on the market. And a lot of the transcription tools out there are really, really good. But where they kind of, where there becomes error is when the candidate often has English as a second language. And so what we do for people who then are recording their interviews, interviewing candidates globally, we say, hey, don't just rely on the transcription. Make sure you have an audio or a video recording of that as well, because there might be some error there. So again, from a very like, how are you actually managing these interviews? How are you actually having conversations with these candidates that are in different time zones and are, varying culturally different places? Be mindful of the technology you're using and how that might be influencing the decisions that you're making, and do everything you can to obviously overcome those types of errors that could emerge from that. So that's kind of this other piece, very tactical, like how do I actually interview and what to be mindful of. I think the last piece is really focusing more on like these like work ethic differences and like cultural fit. And so the piece on, how do we navigate, what a work ethic looks like in one place to another, it really comes down to, the like literature would call it a realistic job preview, RJP. But all it means is that you really want to be clear up front about what the policies are at your organization and have a conversation with the candidate about whether that works for them, right? So to what extent are you flexible? What does that look like? Can you, if you need to be online at a, unconventional time, is that okay, right? Just have those conversations and let them know that that is a really important requirement. It's really about like clear expectation setting. And even early on, to the extent that you can have conversations about like KPIs in your interviews, like these are the types of output that will be expected from you, and have a detailed discussion around that. That will help both you identify, obviously, if the candidate is a good fit and can manage, like if like the cultural barriers are not going to be an issue, but it also helps the candidate self-select out if they realize that that's not going to work for them, right? And we don't want those people to be in the pool if they know that they're not going to be able to work in that particular way. So I think those are things, some very practical things in terms of, well, how do we actually do this and like what to think about as we're